Good morning. A reading from Matthew chapter 25, verses 14 through 30. You can find this reading on page 904 in your Pew Bible. For it is as if a man going on a journey summoned his slaves and entrusted his property to them. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away. The one who had received the 5 talents went off and at once traded with them and made 5 more talents. In the same way, the one who had the 2 talents made 2 talents more. But the one who had received the 1 talent went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those slaves came and settled accounts with them. Then the one who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 more, saying, Master, you handed over to me 5 talents. See, I have made 5 more. His master said to them, Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You have been trustworthy in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. And the one with the 2 talents came forward, saying, Master, you handed over to me 2 talents. See, I have made 2 more. His master said to him, Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You have been trustworthy in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. Then the one who had received the 1 talent also came forward, saying, Master, I knew you were a harsh man, reaping where you did not sow and gathering where you did not scatter seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here you have what is yours. But his master replied, You wicked and lazy slave. You knew, did you, that I reap where I did not sow and gather where I did not scatter? Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and on my return I would have received what was my own with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to the one with the 10 talents. For to all those who have more will be given, and they who have an abundance. But from those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken away. As for this worthless slave, throw him into the outer darkness, where he will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. The Gospel of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. All right, how many people, this is confession time, how many people have ever purchased a lottery ticket? A lottery ticket. Oh, nice. Way more than the early service, I'll tell you that right now. I have been known to, from time to time, to purchase a lottery ticket, especially when Powerball gets to a certain number. I mean, let's face it, when 300 million starts going out there, I'm buying a ticket, because there's no way God is going to give me $300 million unless I buy a ticket, so I might as well give God a chance, right? I mean, that's how I look at it. So yes, there are from time to time opportunities that I will take in buying a lottery ticket. That being said, there's always a prayer that gets offered up with that purchase of a lottery ticket. And the prayer is one of those kinds of prayers that says, God, that's an awful lot of money. And I know being a Christian isn't about wealth and money, but, give me a chance to do good things with that kind of money. I'll be a good person. I'll do the right things. I'll be responsible with $300 million. Just give me that kind of test. That's a test that I want, God, right? Anyone offer that kind of prayer, right? Give me the big bonus. Oh, I'll do good things with it. Or right? You know what I'm talking about. I'll be responsible. I'll do the right thing with all that money. Except for when it comes to lotteries, if you pay attention to those shows, or if you watch the talk shows, or if you kind of read up on past lottery winners, even more so that you want to offer up a prayer like that, because none of us would be like any of them. If you don't know what I'm talking about, there are lottery winners out there, and you can just Google it, and these people all share their stories, and you can see what happens to some, actually very many of them, a lot of them, who win the lottery. Now, I don't want to use any names, because I'm not here to call them out or make fun of them, but I do want to point out some situations of past lottery winners. Next slide, please. Winner 1, 1988, won $16.2 million and lost it all in 1 year. They sank it into various family businesses, and I suppose I should say various failing family businesses. and there was a divorce, and so that was half of it right there, but they lost it all. $16 million in 1 year. I mean, wouldn't we all offer the prayer that we'd be more responsible than that, at least, right? Next slide. Another person in 2004 won $10 million, over $10 million. She was a waitress. She was on government assistance. So in some ways, this is her chance out to raise her kids. And she went on the talk shows almost 10 years later to share her story. And she said, this is what she did. This was her mistake, right? $10 million. She bought a big house. She bought a few fancy cars. Designer clothes, lavish parties, handouts to the family, loans to friends, exotic trips, and you start adding that stuff up, and a lot of us know that $10 million doesn't last very long over a 9-year period. Next slide. Another person won the lottery twice. 1985 and again in 1986 for a total of almost $5.5 million, lost it all, gambled it away, and is currently living in a trailer park. Honestly, that there's not anything wrong with that. I'm not trying to put that person down. But again, when you win $5 million, you would hope that some of that changes. Again, that prayer, God, I would be more responsible, right? I would do the right thing. I would do what is expected of me if I was given that kind of money. Next slide. And the last one, it's a typo. The date isn't 1988. It was actually much more recent. But they won $315 million in the Powerball. After taxes, the whole deal, $114 million. They lost it in 4 years. 4 years. $100 million. Gambled nearly all of it away. The interesting part of the story is as this person got to the bottom of the pot, they realized that they were going through it, so they cashed out. They got a $1.5 million in cash and kept it in their trunk. They were robbed. Someone popped the trunk. They stole the cash. But in the meantime, that cash was collateral for about $1.5 million of checks that they wrote to a casino. So not only did they lose $114 million, they ended up being $1.5 million in debt because they couldn't pay the checks that they wrote. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but I guarantee that a lot of us would want God to test us with $114 million to do the responsible thing, right? Wouldn't you want to give that a shot? I would. Next slide. Responsibility is in many ways part of what this parable lifts up in a lot of our minds, in a lot of ways that this parable has been taught and talked about over the years. It's about doing what's right with that gift or that talent that has been given by God to those 3 people. One person got 5 talents, another one got 2, and the last person got 1 talent. And just like I've lifted up, we all know what the responsible thing to do, what the right thing to do is. And for a lot of us in our 21st century capitalist America, the right thing to do is invest it wisely. Right? Turn that money into something else. That's what we should do with that money. If I asked for a list of what you would do, you'd probably put some money away that would probably grow to help for your kids' education, or do the right, responsible, safe things with the money. That's what a lot of us would say, which is why a lot of us resonate with the first 2 people in the parable. You're given 5 talents, you're going to use it and somehow grow it, and that seems to be the right thing to do. You're given 2 talents. You're going to use it and grow it so you can double that money, and that seems to be the right thing to do. Except for in Jesus' day, it wasn't like that at all. And like most parables, there's a point when the whole parable turns on the other ear. It usually is completely the opposite of what we would expect. The difference is we don't see that as clearly because we're in a different culture 2,000 years later. You see, the oral Jewish teaching tradition talked about what the responsible and right thing to do with money is. And the responsible, right thing to do with money was exactly to bury it in the ground. That's what he was supposed to do with his money. Next slide. The Mishnah taught at that time, it says this: if he guarded it, in this case money, in the manner of guardians, and it was lost, then he is not liable. In other words, if someone gives you a gift or gives you money, and they are expecting that amount back, then the right thing to do is to keep it safe. The problem is there are no banks, there are no safety deposit boxes, there are no safes. You don't have deadbolts on your doors at home. The only safe, right, responsible thing to do with that money is to put it in the ground. That's what people did all the time. You memorized where you put it, you buried it in the ground. That way it's there for safekeeping when whoever owns it returns. That third person did the right and responsible thing, which is a completely different concept as to what the right and responsible thing is to us, except for they did the right and responsible thing and got chastised for it in a very harsh way if you listen to those last few verses of the text. They were chastised for doing what was considered to be right and what was considered to be responsible. Next slide, please. Like all parables, there are many, many layers. That's why we can preach on them all the time. Every 3 years, if you follow the lectionary, you come up with the same stories and probably taught in a very different way, because there are many layers, many cultural influences on it. And at the very least, what is most common, what a lot of us hear, is that this parable is about resources. It's about money. It's about talent. It's about time. It's about all the things that we are gifted with. And that would be true. And then it begs the question is, what do we do with our talents and our time and our financial resources? Well, we're supposed to do more with it. We're not supposed to hoard it, right? If we're given money, we should probably give that money somehow to God's service. But in the same sense, it's not just money, right? This parable talks about if you're given a lot, you should do something with it to further God's kingdom. That's the underlying message. This is why we do this sort of thing. That's kind of why I want the food up here, to remind us that most of us in this room are gifted abundantly with food. We're not supposed to just hoard it in our pantries, right? To give it away. We're supposed to do something with it, further the God's kingdom for those who could use it. Or how about this? Think of all the Lowe's and Home Depots there are that could build how many houses when you know that there are that many homeless people in this community or in this world. Think of all the stuff that we hoard and we save that could really help somebody out and further God's kingdom. Or said another way, and someone reminded me of this statistic this morning, think of all of the empty houses that there are. I know some of them are condemned, right? A lot of them probably in the Detroit area. But let's be real, how many empty houses are there that we're not using compared to how many people are sleeping on the streets? I mean, it's getting cold out there. What are we doing with what God has blessed us with? Are we doing God's work, or are we hoarding it and keeping it to ourselves? That's one message. We've heard it probably 1,000 times, maybe not 1,000 times, but probably 100 times over our years in church. That's nothing new. But there's a whole other level to this that I think is worth bringing up. Next slide, please. And that's this, is that the word talent, which we are immediately associating with the word money, is actually not a unit of a measurement. It's not a monetary unit. It's not like talent doesn't equal dollar on some level. Talent is a measurement of weight. It's a measurement of weight. So it could be X number of talents of gold or talents of silver or talents of copper or whatever it happens to be. It's a measurement of weight. And so there is another underlying current here that talks about the weight of a burden that's been given you. What do you do with the burden God has placed on your shoulders? It has nothing to do with money. But it might have something to do with call, right? What does it mean to experience the burden of call? When God calls you to do something and you don't want to do it. Right, seminarians? Where are my seminarians, right? You know, trust me. To be loaded down with 5 talents, a weight on your shoulders that you don't want, what do you do with it? How do you respond? How do you step up when a burden has been placed upon you by God? We could bury it in the ground and do nothing with it, or we could pull it, hoist it, carry it. Do something with it. There is this whole concept of call involved. Now, I have to admit that this text wasn't planned. I normally do, those of you who have been around, I've been here just over 3 months, I like to do sermon series. So I jump off of what's called the lectionary. If you're not Lutheran or not from a church that uses the lectionary, it's basically what's prescribed over a 3-year period that all the texts are basically laid out for you, and then you rotate every 3 years, or you do it again, I should say, every 3 years. And I like to go off of that sometimes, but I'm new here. There's a lot going on, and to be honest, for the sake of time management, I decided we're going to stick with the lectionary through Christmas because we're coming up to Advent. Advent texts are about anticipating the birth of Christ. There's enough there to work with from almost a series perspective where we're going to stick with that. And so here we are on this particular day where we're talking about talents, we're talking about burdens, and it happens to be the same day that we have our congregational meeting. The same day we're going to be talking about our resources. Not just money in our budget, but our time, our direction. We're going to be talking about the burden of what we as Hope Lutheran Church are called to do over the next year and years. I don't think it's coincidence, but it wasn't planned. What are we called to do? What burden is placed on our shoulders as a congregation? Are we going to take risks, or are we going to put our head in the sand and play it safe? Next slide. The third underlying, probably more like foundational piece that I see in this text that I think is worth bringing up is this. It's that third person who buried that one talent in the ground did so not because they didn't know how to grow their money, but because of a certain worldview, a certain perspective they had on who God was. They believed, and it's very clear, that God was a God of accountability, of vengeance, of wrath. They did so out of fear. That third person acted out of fear. And yet we have a God who lived, died, and rose again for us. A God of grace, a God of mercy, a God of love, a God of forgiveness, a God of restoration, of redemption, a God of resurrection. We have a God that is not a God of fear, but a God of acceptance and love and call. We have a God that tells us time and time again throughout the Scriptures, fear not. Ultimately, although this could be about talent, it could be about resources, it could be about call, it could be about burden, this is about how do we live with the ultimate gift that God has given us, the gift of life. The talent we've been gifted with isn't resources, and isn't time, it isn't fresh ideas, it's every breath that we breathe into our lungs. Are we going to accept that gift out of fear? Or are we going to live that gift out of abundance? God of life, God of joy, a God that calls us to participate in creation. There are many layers to this parable. I think that last one is the most important. Do we live our lives out of fear and hold everything close to the chest and bury our heads in the sands like that third person? Or do we live our lives out of abundance and out of grace and share all that we have as God shared life eternal with us? Let us pray. Creator God, we thank you for all that you have given us. We thank you for the time and the talents and the resources, financial and otherwise, that you have blessed us with so that we can experience life in an abundant way. But we also ask that you bless us with the knowledge of a burden that this life is not to be hoarded with full bank accounts and full pantries, but to be shared so that others may also experience life abundantly. We ask that you help us see that we are called not to do our thing, but to do yours, to do your work, to do your restoring, redeeming, resurrecting work in this world. Help us not bury our heads in the sands, but live the gift of life that you granted us with. In your name we pray. Amen.